Today, we bring you Fred Diamond, president and co founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales and host of the award winning Sales Game Changers podcast and daily webinars. Fred started his career in marketing at Apple Computer, Compaq, and CompuWare. Prior to starting IES, Fred was a marketing consultant to companies such as Microsoft and Oracle. IES members include the likes of Salesforce, Amazon Web Services, Oracle, Tableau Software, and dozens of other top flight companies around the globe. Fred is very proud of the IES Women in Sales Leadership Forum and the annual IES Sales Excellence Award event. Join us. Fred, welcome to this segment on extraordinary outcomes, where we are focusing on what we call is the elephant in the room nobody is talking about, the 5% conversion problem. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you. And I know we're on Sales Experts channel together, and I'm always excited to speak with anybody about professional sales.
So where do you stand on this one from your decades of experience and looking at B2B sales extremely closely with your existing, the current focus that you have on sales, training and teaching? Where do you stand on this issue?
It's interesting. So again, we're talking here about how many leads should be or can be converted into prospects, correct? As compared from suspects into prospects, to use that vernacular. And it does range. It does range anywhere from 1.8 we've heard and all the way to as much as 5. So, the key thing though isn't necessarily the metric, is making sure that people are focused in the right place. We spend so much time. It's not just about, for example, we're doing today's conversation in March of 2021. We're a year into the pandemic, if you will. And, one of the things that we've heard from a lot of our member companies at the Institute for Excellence in Sales are sales leaders who are telling their people, you got to make more calls. We're still in a pandemic. You still got to make 100 phone calls. Well, that may not be the best way to motivate your people these days. We talk to a lot of SDRs and people in the early stage, the top of the funnel, if you will, who aren't getting through to people, or their customers are focused on other things right now. And it can be quite demoralizing.
So how do we sort of, if we are, what I hear you say is that we do agree that we have a problem in terms of the number we are converting from the number of quote unquote leads. We can talk about misqualification. We can talk about any of those. There can be many reasons. It's not only one thing. It can be the way we are setting quota. It can be the way we are compensating our SDRs. There can be so many things, right? So if we accept that is a problem, that's genuine, this 1.8 to 5 or 8, whatever you say, but it's a single digit number.
Oh yeah.
What according to you should be done to fix this? Because if we don't fix it and we continue to spend 90% of our time, if not 90, 60% of our time chasing leads which will never convert, trying to get them for a face-to-face, and they will not come because they're not interested. Yet, we are going to do that. Yeah.
There's a whole slew of ways. I reflect back to when I was a VP of marketing for a technology company in 2000, the year 2000. And we had a trade show and we went and we brought, 200 leads back from the trade show. And I remember that we handed them to one of the sales reps, and she sent me an email later in the day, and she said, "Oy vey, are you kidding me? These are horrible." And I remember as a marketing, most of my career prior to creating the Institute for Excellence in Sales was as a corporate marketing leader for companies like Apple and Compaq and CompuWare software. And I remember thinking here's 200 great leads for you, that go to it. Let's get some sales. And the sales rep replied back, "These are the worst leads I've ever seen." And at that moment, I said, "Okay, let's think about this. What are we handing?" And I've always been of the belief that marketing and now sales enablement, their mission is to accelerate sales, right? Everybody who's in sales, starting at the SDR all the way to the VP of sales and CSO, whatever it might be, everyone else's job in the company is to put things in place to accelerate that process. So if we take our topic here, and SDRs and BDRs, whatever, if they're spending too much time trying to get to people who are just horrible leads, then there's a huge amount of time and energy that's being wasted. I think as we're talking about this on the Sales Experts channel, I think it's a sales leadership problem. And I think it goes back to, are we training our people the right way? Are we helping them understand what we do, what our customers do, and why our customers need to utilize whatever products or services that we may bring to the market?
Are we following a wrong path in the way that we are actually prospecting or suspecting whatever we are doing? Is that whole process outdated and not ready for a era where the buyer is not dependent on the salesperson anymore or the vendor anymore for his purchase decisions? He has way too much information. In fact, I mean, there is enough data to show that the information asymmetry, which used to actually be in favor of the salesperson, has now turned 180 degrees, and the buyer is far more informed than an individual vendor salesperson, because not only has he the internet, he has access to experts, he has enough qualified procurement people in-house, because the role has changed completely. So the environment has changed completely, yet we continue to do the suspecting prospecting process the same way we used to do 15 years back.
Now, that's a great question, and I agree with you. I think there's one place where I'm going to disagree, though. Yes, absolutely, because of the internet, social media, access to experts. There's obviously, we all know this. There's tons more information available. You may not need to speak to a sales professional, but if we're talking about an app, if we're talking about office supplies, it may not be that critical. But when we're talking about complex software, we're talking about mission critical software, we're talking about medical devices. What we've seen is that customers don't necessarily know everything from access to the internet. So sales professionals moving forward have to be elite. So we're using the word elite a lot at the Institute for Excellence in Sales, because sales professionals, to be valuable and credible and worthwhile to their companies moving forward, they need to be able to crisply understand the needs of their customer. They need to crisply understand how their technology or solutions play that role. And they need to be thinking 1 to 3 years out, right? About where the customer is going. It's a challenge for the SDR position to be looking further out, because their job is, okay, here's the 20, 50, 100 calls you need to make today, because we believe that's an important metric. Goes back to what you were saying, because of decades of sales process. So what we're seeing at the Institute for Excellence in Sales with companies like Amazon and Salesforce and Red Hat, companies that are members of the IES, is that they're taking a more forward look into equipping their people so that they understand the challenges that their customer is going to be going through, not today, right, but into the future. And it's become especially critical during the last year because basically every customer in the world has three things in common. How do we get past COVID? The quarantine, the lockdown, the shutdown, all those things. Secondly, how do we get past all the financial challenges that have hit industry and hit companies because of COVID and the financial repercussions? And third, whatever's third, maybe something impacts your industry. If you're in the sports industry, obviously there aren't people in seats, or the entertainment industry. Healthcare has been completely flipped. Cloud technology providers have been accelerated like nuts over the last year. So everyone's dealing with that. Is our sales process in sync with helping our customers emerge from one of those three things? And if it's calling them 100 times a day and saying, hey, it's great to hear you, how are things going during COVID? Well, we should know how things are going for them during COVID, because we're all going through it together. So what we're seeing is a lot of the progressive sales organizations, and I don't mean progressive company, I mean progressive thought-wise, is how are we providing value to the customer? And calling them 100 times a day and saying, hey, is there anything you need? How are you? Probably isn't providing a whole lot of value to them.
That's a great point, because I think that's where the disconnect is absolutely distinct. Because what I hear you say is that we really have to get into the buyer's journey, not what we define as the buyer's journey, but the real buyer's journey, way ahead of time, way ahead of the decision making point, which can be 18 months, 24 months, which also means we have to be extremely patient, which means our entire compensation, quota, all of that has to change. And our reliance on buyer intent data, which is the buzzword today, right? Buyer intent data is at the last point. I mean, it's that 60-70% of the job is already over, discussion is already over. By the time you find buyer intent data on the internet and somebody picks it up and tells you, hey, you know what, this guy is looking for X and you sell X, so why don't you go and talk to him? He has already spoken to 5 vendors. That's I think what is happening and where the disconnect is. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do, and maybe he's spoken to one vendor, and that's enough. So I really like your point here, and we're spending a lot every day. I do a webinar, and I talk to sales leaders or sales thought leaders such as yourself, and there's been three main things that have come out, but I'm just going to focus on two of them. One of them is the need to create value like you've never created before. And sales has always been, especially enterprise and complex and B2B, has always been about value creation. People don't need to talk to you if you're not providing some type of value. And here's the thing, like we alluded to a few minutes ago, every customer on the planet has a need for more value from partners. And I'm going to say the sales organization as a partner, only if you can help them get past those three things right now. The second thing, though, also is I don't want to confuse the issue and saying that, yeah, we have 18 months now to solve the problem. We still got to sell things, right? So, sales is the organization that's getting companies, out of any challenge that they might have found over the last year. And we've spoken to some companies that have had their best year ever in 2020, and some that are off to the best year ever in early 2021. And we have some that have had a huge challenge, and the ones that have emerged, if you will, or responded. I hate, one of my least favorite words of all time is pivot, right? But companies that have not necessarily pivoted what they offer, but pivoted in their message because they understood, okay, yeah, we have to sell and get out of here, but we're only going to be successful if we're providing value to help our customers achieve what they need to achieve because of all the challenges of the last couple of years. And I think one of the great results of this last couple of months, and I hope we don't lose sight of that, is specifically that sales professionals need to provide more value than ever before. It's always been about value. And, just to use an example here about the SDR process, you and I probably get tons of emails. I just got one before we started the show on LinkedIn. Hi, Fred, I see that you're a CEO of a company, so you probably need more leads. Click on my calendar button here and let's talk about that. We call it connect and pitch, right? And I now call it connect, pitch, and block, right? There's absolutely zero, and I run a small company, right? So there's zero value that you're going to provide me. In the beginning, I was thinking, maybe there's something. Now I'm like, no, because my challenge isn't more leads. My challenge is providing more value to my customers. So imagine if you're an SDR with no insight or knowledge into your customer, and you're reaching out to let's say you get a CIO on the phone for some reason, and you, a chief information officer, and you say, hey, you must be challenged with productivity. Click. I'm not challenged with productivity. I'm challenged with something else that you should have known, sales rep, before you were able to connect with me. So just to wrap up that part of the conversation, sales professionals need to be elite by providing themselves value for the customer, and that's first and foremost. And maybe it takes 20 times to get through, so that process is still in play. But it's not about getting them finally on the phone or reply to an email so that you could say something ridiculous like, gee, you're probably challenged with productivity. That is the lamest thing. And you will be out of a job and out of a career if that's how you approach it. And I believe if you're a sales leader, your time is going to be short because that's not how you need to lead and manage your people right now. What do you think?
This is very, very, very important point because I got one set of data. I mean, I've been looking at a lot of data, right, lately because of this. So one of the things I got is the average tenure of a VP of sales has now dropped to 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
Most VP of sales are losing their job in 18 months. And this is not a COVID phenomena.
No, it is. As a matter of fact, I do a podcast. It's called the Sales Game Changers podcast. We've had over 1 million downloads. We won some awards, and I'm up to episode number 335. So today we posted number 335, and I typically interview sales VPs. And I've gone back to the list a couple of times to reconnect or connect. And I was amazed at how many of the VPs of sales that I interviewed. I've been doing the podcast since the summer of 2017. You'd be out of the 50 first episodes I've done, probably 30 are no longer in that job that they held just 3 years ago. So that's longer than the 18 months you talked about. And actually, it's 2021. So I guess I'm coming up on 4 years now. But yeah, it's a tenuous position. And yeah, there's external factors like acquisitions and things like that.
Sure.
But it's a tough gig. And I think just last comment here about why I believe there's a lot of disconnect there. It's really hard to be successful in sales, and it's a lot of things have to go right, and timing and the solution and the product and your market, and then forget about macro things like a pandemic or
Yeah.
9/11 or
Sure.
whatever it might be. Just to manage your team. I mean, right now, imagine if you're a first level sales manager and you were promoted in February of 2020 and you've never been in the room with the people that you're managing, and your only exposure to them is like this, and you're telling them you need to keep your camera on all day. I'll give you one last example here. We work with a lot of world-class companies, and a lot of them have young people as SDRs or early stage, and they also have senior people too. It's March. Back in January, I got a couple of mid 20-year-old SDR types asking if they could spend some time with me via Zoom. I'm always interested in talking. So I remember I had two conversations in a row. Boom, boom. It was 5 o'clock Eastern time in the United States. One of the reps was in Chicago. One of the reps was in the Boston, United States area. And they looked horrible. And these were smart kids, and they looked a wreck. One of them was wearing a baseball cap turned backwards. And since we were doing Zoom, I could see, you have this nice black screen behind you, but I could see into their apartment, and I saw the pizza box on a table, and the other one I saw what looked to be some dirty clothes. And these guys were like, my company has told me, since I'm home in my apartment, might as well be working. Can't go to bars, can't hang out with friends. If you're awake, might as well make some phone calls, Well, that's like ridiculous. And, to expect that now, again, we're coming into spring, people are getting vaccinated. So things are opening up a little more, but that was horrible. I remember thinking to myself, how are these people being led? And I understand, okay, hey, I'm giving you a computer, giving you a second monitor. You can't go anywhere. It's cold. Might as well work. No, I hate the term life-work balance, but you can't expect your salespeople to be working around the clock just because they're stuck to their apartment. And I don't want to mention any of the companies. They're actually, none of them are actually members of the IES, but people that we've had some association with. So I think it's a huge leadership problem. And sales leaders, man, they need to figure it out quickly and step up. They need to take care of their people. Today, we're doing this broadcast on International Women's Day. I know it's going to be listened to in the future, but are we taking care of the women who are also managing the household usually, and homeschool? And imagine if you're like a woman who's a VP who's leading a team and you have 3 kids under the age of 15, and expecting them to do what you're expecting them to do. It really isn't fair. We really need to take a look at what are we expecting, and how are we managing our people.
Great. I completely agree with you about the value part because, as I said, I talk to buyers because I think that's one of the things which is missing in this discourse. We don't talk to enough buyers. We don't have enough discourse, enough discussion with buyers. And they actually say that, is your product going to match my needs? Yes, of course, it has to be. That's the basic box that has to be checked. Will I negotiate with the price? Yes, I'm going to negotiate the price. But I'm not going to buy because of that. I'm going to buy because can I see a value roadmap from you to me over the next 5 years?
And that's a cool point. To me.
Yes.
Is there a value prop to me, not to banks, to me, to my bank? If I'm director of procurement or CIO or CTO of the bank, it's like, you need as the sales rep to really understand before you get on that call,
Yeah.
Before
Yeah.
you even reach out, my
Yeah.
last message here is, and I like what you said, it's all about value, even more so than ever before. But sales professionals out there, the other word we didn't talk about was preparation. And
Sure.
it's not just making sure, I'm prepped for the call and, oh yeah, I just looked at their website for the first time ever, that you thought through the messages for that particular person and their company because of what their company is going through. Let's use banks, for example. A bank is not a bank is not a bank. Every large bank is different. Mid banks are different. Small banks, business banks, regional banks. A lot of banks just service an industry.
Yes.
Maybe if they're in Iowa, they service farms, I guess. If they're in wherever they are, they a lot of times the customers that they're servicing are maybe an interest in industry or something on those lines. And buyers just don't have time. They just don't have time anymore to waste for their time to be waste. I mean, the last thing is one of the other challenges right now that we're all facing, not just that sales reps are working from their basements or from their bedrooms, customers are at home too.
Yeah.
They'll start going back, but I've spoken to tons of customers over the last 9 months. They're all home, for the most part. I mean, if they run a store, maybe, there's people in the stores, of course, but corporate people, they ain't in a building, they're in their home. I interviewed the VP of a large hospitality chain a month ago, and I
Hmm.
could tell he was in his dining room, and that's the way it is. I mean, I'm sure he'd love to be, in headquarters, but he just can't go back right now. I mean, maybe in a month or two or three, but so they're dealing with the same challenges that we're dealing as humans, managing our kids, managing our parents. If you're at that age, you know, are we going to get what you call it, one of those stimulus checks in the United States or something along those lines? So we're all dealing with the same stuff. Hopefully at some point in the very near future we'll be past it. But you still, sales reps, you got to do two things. You got to figure out the value that you can bring them, and you really need to spend time reading, preparing, becoming an expert in your customer's industry so that you could be of value to them.
So the first problem is potentially the sales leadership. and and from that, most of the other things that you told about actually prepping the SDR or even AEs, whoever they are, that you stay focused on the value that we can deliver as organization, and actually prepping them and actually making them understand, if this is my persona, this is the value we bring to them, and so on and so forth. That's where the disconnect is really.
It's interesting. I talk to SDRs, account execs, seasoned sales professionals, and when they ask me, Fred, what do you see? What should I be thinking about right now? And they do. I get a lot of calls. I always say this. I say, two things. You are the vice president of your life. So, you need to take your career seriously. And if you're in sales, it ain't about smiling and dialing. It's about value to your customer. That is how you will succeed. The sales professionals that I deal with who have had lengthy, successful careers understood their customer. I really believe that. They understood the challenges their customers were going through, why they needed their solutions, but where they were. And the second thing I tell them is get to know an industry. Become an expert in your customer's industry so you could engage at a minimum in value conversations for them. If you're selling to the government, you need to know what's going on with budgeting, and you need to know what's going on strategic direction in your agencies, and you need to know what your mission of the customer's mission is. You got to become students of those things. The great sales professionals, yeah, they understand technique and they understand active listening and they understand, how to do a great presentation, the skills, the chops, if you will. But all the ones who are very, very successful are passionate about helping their customers achieve their goal. And the only way you can get there isn't with broad statements. It isn't with slick approaches. It's with truly saying to them, what do you think the impact is going to be of this regulation that the government is thinking about imposing on your industry? Few sales reps ask those kinds of questions, right? And before you even ask the question, give it a little bit of thought. If you're on the phone with a CIO and you're saying, what do you think about this new regulation that's going through the House? Oh, well, that's going to be problematic for us. Do you have any ideas, sales rep? well, I was kind of thinking, this is a new thing that we have in our solution that allows blah, blah, blah. So think it through. Even if you're in your first job as an SDR, typically SDRs, right? It's their first job. Maybe they're just out of school, they want to learn about sales, all of those things. Spend some time as you're being trained. You're typically being trained by your company on our technology and how we do things. Here's how we dial the phone. Here's how our HubSpot works, all those things, right? But spend time on your own at night, reading about your industry, becoming an expert on your industry. That will set you apart.
We are the whole sales discourse is, you know, full of techniques, full of shortcuts. How can you, what kind of a 30-second script can you have that the CIO who you just mentioned will be hooked to you, Mr. SDR, who is 22 years old. So a lot of that is there. Essentially, a big issue is also that we are not recognizing the fact that the buyer has fundamentally changed. The buyer has fundamentally changed. His buying has fundamentally changed. The refusing to recognize that is also part of the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and that's where sales leadership comes in. The SDR, I mean, they're in a lot of cases, they're tasked. Okay, you got to make 50 phone calls a day. Here's our message. Here's our script. We just talked a lot about how they can distinguish themselves by doing the extra work at night. Spending time instead of sitting in front of the TV watching sports or whatever, going to the internet and researching challenges facing banking CIOs, challenges facing banks in the next 5 years, truly becoming someone of value to your customer. And then I believe it's sales leadership's issue is to figure out, how are our customers buying, and to understand through organizations like sales enablement, right? And marketing people need to get smarter about, the shifts in buying and, what's coming out. Um, so I agree with both. I think SDRs and that level, BDRs, SDRs, whatever, take it upon yourself to become an expert in your customers' challenges. That is how you will become valuable to them. Because you're right. If they're probably not doing the research on some technology, it's probably the team, the IT team, the CTO, whatever it might be. And CIO is providing the direction, so to speak. So how are you providing value to how I can solve my customers' challenges is where you need to think. And sales leadership, you always got to be thinking about, how's the process changed? How do I better manage my SDRs? How do I get them to be of more value so that I can have a job more than 18 months? I mean, as I always tell people too, if you want to get a promotion, get your boss promoted. That's the easiest way to get a promotion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fred. I really enjoyed our chat. I hope you did too. And I would hope that we'll talk more.
This was interesting, and I appreciate your time. I'm thinking about a whole bunch of different things, and I talk to sales leaders every day, and it's an interesting position. Sales leaders, you don't want to show yourself as being too vulnerable, right? Now, I've spoken to some leaders. I did a great podcast with a leader named Melissa Merwin. She runs sales for U.S. LinkedIn business, and her whole conversation with me was about being vulnerable and letting people on your team know what you don't know. And there's some risk, but a lot of sales leaders are afraid to ask people below them, what are you guys seeing out there? Because they want to be seen as, I know everything, I'm the leader. And it's a challenging place to be because it is moving fast, and there's a lot of new things, but you got to figure out how to be on top of that.
It's interesting, before I let you go, that the same people today acknowledge that their children know about things better, some things better, and they have no problem in letting their guards down and saying, this kid, my kid can show me A, B, C, D. They have no problem. But that behavior somehow is not getting replicated in the office floor.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, it's kind of interesting though. I would think if you're the kind of sales leader who, and I've worked with tons of sales leaders who are vulnerable, who have said, I remember I did an interview. It was relatively early on. It was with a guy named Dorian Cass at Newstar, And he said, when I got my master's in business, there was no course on selling through a pandemic, right? And we've kind of figured some things out now. It's there aren't many new surprises coming now a year in.
Hmm.
We kind of know. We don't know necessarily when immunity is going to kick in. We could all go back to an office if we're going to, or we could start going to events if we're going to. I see some conferences that are popping up for June, and I'm thinking they're going to be huge failures, but maybe not. Maybe people are just dying enough to get out there. I was looking at something, a sporting event yesterday in the U.S. on TV, and there were like tons of people not wearing masks, not socially distant. So,
Hmm.
maybe people are taking different types of risks. I'm still talking to some sales leaders who have said we're not going back to the office until January,
Hmm.
and we're telling our people you can't go to an event until January. So, we'll kind of see where that goes. But yeah, I mean, for sales professionals, for leaders, based on your comment, figure out a way to be vulnerable and learn from your people.
Absolutely.
This was great. I appreciate it.